Lord says, let my people go so they can worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will send a plague of frogs across your entire land. The Nile River will swarm with frogs. They will come up out of the river and into your palace, even into your bedroom and onto your bed. They will enter the house of your officials and your people. They will even jump into your ovens and your kneading bowls. Frogs will jump on you, your people, and all your officials. And the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron, raise the staff in your hand over all the rivers, canals, and ponds of Egypt, and bring up frogs over all the land. So Aaron raised his hand over the waters of Egypt, and frogs came up and covered the whole land. But the magicians were able to do the same thing with their magic. They too caused frogs to come up on the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and begged him, plead with the Lord to take the frogs away from me and my people. I will let your people go so they can offer sacrifices to the Lord. You set the time, Moses replied. Tell me when you want me to pray for you, your officials, and your people. Then you and your houses will be rid of the frogs. They will remain only in the Nile River. Do it tomorrow, Pharaoh said. All right, Moses replied. It will be as you have said. Then you will know that there is no one like the Lord our God. The frogs will leave you and your houses, your officials, and your people. They will remain only in the Nile River. So Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh's palace, and Moses cried out to the Lord about the frogs he had inflicted on Pharaoh. And the Lord did just what Moses had predicted. The frogs in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields all died. The Egyptians piled them into great heaps, and a terrible stench filled the land. But when Pharaoh saw that relief had come, he became stubborn. He refused to listen to Moses and Aaron just as the Lord had predicted. So the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron, raise your staff and strike the ground. The dust will turn into swarms of gnats throughout the land of Egypt. So Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded. When Aaron raised his hand and struck the ground with his staff, gnats infested the entire land, covering the Egyptians and their animals. All the dust in the land of Egypt turned into gnats. Pharaoh's magicians tried to do the same thing with their secret arts, but this time they failed. And gnats covered everyone, people and animals alike. This is the finger of God, the magicians exclaimed to Pharaoh. But Pharaoh's heart remained hard. He wouldn't listen to them, just as the Lord had predicted. Thus far, the word of the Lord. You may be seated. All the dust in the land of Egypt turned into gnats. Pharaoh's magicians tried to do the same thing with their secret arts, but this time they failed. And the gnats covered everyone, people and animals alike. This is the finger of God, the magicians exclaimed to Pharaoh. I want you just to turn to somebody and just say, nobody but God. Nobody but God. For 400 years, the people of God lived in the land of Egypt under the heavy hand of pharaohs who had forgotten Joseph. For 400 years, these descendants of Abraham, whose God revealed himself as El Shaddai and Jehovah Jireh, have been subject to the whims and ways of Egyptians serving idols named Ra, Horus, Osiris, and Isis. As one generation gave way to another, it seemed as if the cries that they lifted to their God fell on deaf ears. As time passed, as hope unborn seemed to die one generation after another, somebody would talk about their God, how their God brought life to Sarah's dead womb, how their God answered Abraham's obedience with a ram in the bush, how their God demonstrated his favor upon their efforts as herdsmen, how their God gifted Joseph with the ability to dream, to interpret dreams, and to administer at all levels of responsibility. And yet even within that same conversation, somebody would mention how their current situations don't seem to show the power of this God of their fathers. The ways of the Egyptians and the power of the idols of Egypt seem to be far superior to their God. Their usual conversation is interrupted by word of the return of Moses to Egypt. Moses, the one-time prince of Egypt, the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter, so named for having been drawn out of the Nile River while in a basket of bulrushes, has returned, and he's returned with a bold proclamation. He's had an encounter with their God on the backside of Mount Horeb. And the God who is God spoke to him from the midst of a bush that was burning that did not burn up. Their God, who seemingly had gone into radio silence for 400 years, that God has seen their afflictions. That God has heard their cries. That God has known their sorrows. And that God has sent him to confront Pharaoh with the words, "Thus says the Lord, that I am that I am, let my people go." The people gladly receive Moses and Aaron's report, and they bow and worship. Buoyed by this, Moses and Aaron, they go to Pharaoh and they issue their declaration from the Lord, to which Pharaoh responds by commanding that the people no longer be supplied with straw to make bricks, and requiring that they make the same number of bricks as they did before, only with less material. Seeing this, God sends Moses to the people to encourage them, but the people refused to listen. They had become discouraged by the brutality of their slavery. Somewhere underneath was the thought, what about this God? Who is this God that I should trust him when I'm facing what I'm facing? Is this God any different from the idols of Egypt? Do the idols of Egypt have more power than our God? Should I continue to believe this God? Is there anything about him or to him that makes my allegiance to him worthwhile? God picks up on this. You need to know God knows every thought that we think. And so he sends Moses and Aaron back to Pharaoh. Aaron throws down the staff, and the staff becomes a serpent, and Pharaoh calls on his magicians who do the same thing, but only Aaron's staff swallows up their staffs. God then has Moses take the staff down to the Nile River and strike the Nile River, and when Moses does so, the Nile River turns to blood. Pharaoh charges his magicians to do likewise, and they do so. It's 2 for 2. God sends Moses back to Pharaoh again, requesting that the people be let go so that they can worship God, and Pharaoh refuses. And this time, God sends a plague of frogs upon the land. And Pharaoh instructs the magicians who follow suit. It's now 3 to 3. There seems to be no difference between their God and the gods of Egypt. In each case, the magicians are able to seemingly duplicate what their God does. With each instance, Pharaoh seems to be emboldened all the more in his resistance to Moses' proclamation. And with each time, the Egyptians are more pronounced in their posture of oppression. That is to say, it gets worse. Yes, with each time the people of God are less prone to believe what Moses and Aaron have been saying. The first time they believed it. The second time they believed it a little less. And now this third time they're about to give up. There are times when circumstances may cause you to wonder about the real difference that your believing God actually makes. Things not happening as you had hoped, or even things becoming worse than you wished. can lead you to have some serious questions. I would dare say that there are some believers in Houston, Texas right now, in Beaumont, Texas right now, in up and down the state of Florida right now, who are having some serious questions. Is your God really who you thought that he is? Is he really any different from anything else? Does he have any more power than anything else? Is he worth allegiance more than anything else? Would you be better off with another God or no God at all? There's somebody who can testify that before you hooked up and you really got tight with God, there was a level of tension you did not have in your life. There were some battles you did not have to fight before you hooked up with this God who said he'd make all things new. But now that you've hooked up with him, there's some tension that you did not have, and some battles that you did not have, and there were some things that you thought that he was going to put on the fast track for you, and they still have not come to pass. When those things come your way, you start wondering about this God. That's the tension contained in chapter 8, verse 15. But then verse 16 comes with the Lord speaking again and telling Aaron, raise your staff and strike the ground. And he says the dust will turn into gnats and will swarm throughout Egypt. And Moses and Aaron do just as the Lord directs. And sure enough, dust turns into gnats. It's now 3-3. It's now 4-3. And Pharaoh and his boys, they are up to bat. The magicians of Egypt attempt to do the same thing, but this time they failed. They were able to turn water into blood and bring frogs and the like, but this time they fail. And the gnats cover everybody, cover people and animals. And the magicians say to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. Now you need to know that when they say to Pharaoh, they are talking to somebody who is believed to be divine himself. They are talking now to one of their idol gods. And they are saying to one of their idol gods, this is the finger of God. They experience a nobody but God moment. They come into contact with a moment where neither they nor anyone else can do what they've seen done, and they know it to be nobody but God. Against the backdrop of God's people wondering about him and their enemies claiming power over him, God produces a nobody but God moment. God moves in such a way that God establishes his sovereign singularity for everybody to see and understand. For 3 chapters, Pharaoh and the Egyptians have acted as if they and their gods are equal, if not superior, to Moses and Israel. God. For 3 chapters, they've acted in ways that have mimicked God's power. For 3 chapters, they have withstood the proclaimed will of God. For 3 chapters, God's people have been wondering about how much power their God has. For 3 chapters, they've been doubtful of his authority. But now with the plague of gnats, God does something that nobody else can do. God does something unrivaled and unmatched. God does something that totally sets God apart. God does something that can only be explained in terms of him. It can't be attributed to anybody but God. They say this is the finger of God. Maybe I'm talking to folk who haven't had a nobody but God moment, but if you've ever been in a situation where it's been nobody but God, you ought to be a little bit more excited about what I'm talking about. This is the finger of God. It's a nobody but God moment. God works in ways to establish his sovereign singularity. Against the backdrop of other things being lifted as supreme, God is able to move in such a way that demonstrates that God is God all by himself. It's God moving in a furnace to show Nebuchadnezzar that he alone is God. Nebuchadnezzar, before he puts the boys in the furnace, he said, and what is this God who is able to deliver you from what I'm about to put you in? And God said, I'm glad you asked the question, and you've given me the opportunity to show that I am the singular God who is able to enter the fire, loose them from the fire, give them power in the fire, bring them out of the fire, and when they come out the fire, they don't look like, they don't smell like, they don't act like they ever been in the fire. I'm the type of God that when I bring them out the fire, I'm able to give them a higher position than they had before they ever went in the fire. It's God working in the lion's den. When Darius puts Daniel in the lion's den, and Darius is having a problem because he realized he's been duped by Daniel's enemies and he can't go to sleep. And when he wakes up the next morning and he makes his way to the lion's den, he's got one question: Daniel, is your God able to deliver you from the lions? And all that he needs to do, all that he needs to hear is that Daniel has a voice to be able to say anything, to discover that God is able to shut lions' mouths and keep you cool in a hard situation. I believe that there's somebody who knows that there have been moments in your life where God has demonstrated his sovereign singularity, where you know that it has been nobody but God. When you think about those times when your back has been against the wall, when there was nobody there to help you out, and God held you together and God brought you through, you know that it was nobody but God. Somebody is having a nobody but God reflection. You're thinking about a battle that he's fought, and a door that he's opened, and a way that he's made, and a disease that he's healed, and an addiction that he's overcome, and a marriage that he's repaired, and children that he's kept. Is there anybody in here who can say, I've had a nobody but God moment? Where God demonstrated his sovereign singularity. Yeah, but you got to pay attention. You got to pay attention. Pay attention. Pay attention. God sends the gnats to be seen by everybody. God doesn't do this work in private. This is an open work. Because when God wants to exert his sovereign singularity, it's for people to see him. And there are some things that God does for God to be seen doing what he's doing. And what that means is sometimes God has to let things get to a point where only he can do what he does. And so you gotta raise the question, why does it take 3 chapters for God to do what nobody else can do? I mean, surely God could have done it earlier. God didn't gain anything in the 3 chapters. God was what he was 3 chapters earlier. I mean, he had the same type of power that he had 3 chapters earlier. He had the same authority that he had 3 chapters earlier. So why does God let 3 chapters go by before God establishes there's nobody like him? Why does God do this? Well, could it be that God lets things go in such a way that when God does what he does, even those who are prone to oppose him have to see him doing what only he can do? Perhaps God lets things play out so that those who are prone to rival him have to see him do what he does and know that it's nobody but him. The nobody but God work is God says, I want to do a work for people to see me doing what I'm doing. And like Israel struggled with Pharaoh and Egypt, and like the boys in the furnace, and like Daniel in the lion's den served as the backdrop for God's work to be seen, so sometimes our struggles and our difficulties and our challenges the backdrop for God's work to be seen. Sometimes God says, I gotta let some chapters play out so that it's now not just you looking for me to do something, but I want some other eyes to see me do what I'm about to do. Sometimes I gotta let some chapters go by and some time to pass and some folk to act crazy and some enemies to assume that they've got the upper hand, so that when I do what I do, everybody will know that I did it, and I did it all by myself. That's why David says, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. God is saying, David is saying, I want you to understand, God is going to let some enemies come close enough to see God do what God does in your life. God ain't going to do it when they're at a distance. Sometimes God's got to let them come close. And in order for them to come close, they got to feel like it's their advantage to get close to you. They got to feel like they got the upper hand. They got to feel like you don't have any power. They got to feel like that there's not much to you, and that's to draw them in. Because when God has their full attention, when they're expecting your demise, that's when God says, I'm going to do my thing. That's when I'm going to anoint your head with oil. That's when I'm going to cause your cup to run over. That's when I'm going to renew your strength like an eagle. That's when I'm going to allow you to walk in the fire and not be burned. That's when I'm going to allow you to walk in lions and they ain't going to do you any harm. I'm going to show up when your enemy expects it the least. Am I talking to somebody here? Somebody can testify that God brought you through with eyes on you, with people expecting you to fail and falter. But God said, I'm going to keep your lights on. I'm going to keep your rent paid. I'm going to keep food on your table. I'm going to keep clothes on your back. I got all eyes looking on you, believing that it's going to be your demise. But I'm going to have them watch me turn your defeat into your victory. I'm going to hold you close. I'm going to put the pieces of your life back together again. I'm going to let them see you jump in a ditch, but I got a trampoline that's going to bounce you up even higher than you were before. I guess what I'm trying to get somebody to understand is God's got folks' eyes on you. Oh yeah, folk are looking at you. And they wondering how it's going to turn out and what you going to do and how bad it's going to be when you fail or falter. But God says, no, I got eyes on you so that I can be seen doing what I do with you, for you, and through you. I got people curious. I got people skeptical. I got some naysayers, because when I do what I do in your life, they're going to know that it was nobody but me, and that I am the God who is on your side to fight your battle. You ain't got to open your mouth on this one. You will hold your peace and watch me do my thing. Tell your neighbor, keep watching, keep watching, keep watching, keep watching, keep watching. It's to be seen. It's to be seen. It's to be seen. It's to establish his sovereign singularity, but there's they see it for themselves and they proclaim, this is the finger of God. This isn't Ra, this isn't Horus, this isn't Osiris, this isn't Isis, this isn't even Pharaoh. This is the finger of the supreme God of the universe. There is no other God like this. This God is God. And having seen it, they have to say it. They can't keep it to themselves. They can't hold it in. They got to say something. They got to acknowledge their recognition. When God produces a nobody but God moment, the folk who see it have to say something. Yeah, when God shows up in such a way and establishes that he alone is God, you can't keep that thing to yourself. You've got to say what you've seen. You've got to declare the conclusion that you've drawn. You've got to share the revelation that you've received. They say, this is the finger of God. Nebuchadnezzar, having witnessed the boys being thrown into the furnace and seeing God loose them and protect them inside of the furnace, he had to say what he had seen. And hear what he says: there is no other God who can rescue like this. Darius, having seen Daniel be thrown into the midst of the lion's den, and seeing Daniel come out of the den of lions untouched and unharmed, he said, I got to say something about what I just saw. And so he starts talking and saying, Daniel's God is the living God, and he will endure forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his rule will never end. He rescues and he saves his people. Maybe that's not enough for you. Look further down the line and you'll find the same thing going on with Jesus. There's a leper who, having experienced Jesus cleanse him from the disease, Jesus said, now don't tell anybody. But the leper said, I know what he said, but as I'm looking at who I am now, and when I look at where I used to be and what I wasn't able to do and where I wasn't able to go, I just can't keep that thing to myself. And so he told everybody what he saw. The woman of Samaria, having experienced Jesus at the well, my God, she was one who did not even want the attention of anyone. That's why she came out to the well to draw at the hottest part of the day. But when she meets Jesus for herself, when she experiences the power of Jesus in her own life, she says, no more hiding from me. I'm going to go right down the main street where all eyes are going to be on me. And I've just got to talk about the experience that I've had. Come see a man who told me everything that there was about me. Is this not the Christ? There was a man who was born blind, and Jesus gives him his sight. And the Pharisees are upset. The Sadducees and the high priests, they're really upset. And they go to his parents, and his parents are afraid that they might be kicked out of church. So they say, don't talk to us, talk to our boy. And the boy now, who has been blind from birth, but now he has his sight, and all eyes are on him. His parents might get kicked out of church. He says, I don't know about everything, but one thing I know, once I was blind, but now I see. And is this not the Savior of the world? Look yonder on the hill called Calvary, when they've hung Jesus high, when they've stretched him wide, when he's hung between earth and heaven, when it's gotten dark between the 6th and the 9th hour, and it looks like everything is over. But there's something about Jesus that a Roman soldier has been observing. He saw Jesus take a beating from the soldiers of Rome. He saw Jesus have a crown of thorns thrust upon his head. He saw Jesus carry a rugged cross down the Via Dolorosa. He saw them nail him in his wrists and rivet him in his heels. He saw him lifted up between earth and heaven. But he's seen everything, and in his mind, I've never seen anybody die like this. He heard him say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He heard him tell a thief, today you'll be with me in paradise. He saw him tell his mama, woman, behold thy son, and tell his disciple, son, behold thy mother. He saw him between the 6th and the 9th hour quoting the scriptures of God. There's something on the inside that causes him to say, I haven't experienced anything like this before. Surely this must be the Son of God. Hallelujah. They put him in the grave and they think it's all over. But then early Sunday morning, he gets up with all power in his hand, and women who came to anoint a dead body, they find an empty tomb, and then later Mary sees a risen Savior, so they got to go back and just say what they've seen. The Lord is risen indeed. I wonder, is there anybody who can say, I've seen the Lord do something in my own life, and I have to talk about it. I have to proclaim the Lord's saving work. I got to proclaim the Lord's delivering work. I got to proclaim the Lord's healing work. I got to proclaim the Lord's providing work. I got to proclaim the Lord's sustaining work. I wonder, is there anybody in the building who does not mind letting your neighbor know, neighbor, I know for myself that God is real. I know him to be real as a Savior, because one day he saved my soul. I was on my way to a burning hell, but God saved me, rescued me, ransomed me, snatched me, drew me up. I know what it is to have the Lord save you. But tell your neighbor, he didn't just save me, but I know what it is to be healed by his power. Anybody been in a sick room, couldn't get well, but the Lord reached out and touched you? Yeah! Now you're able to testify. I know he's a healer, but wait a minute, he's not just a healer, but I know he is a provider. Yeah! Been between two jobs, had more money than I had money, but God kept food on the table, roof on my head, shoes on my feet, clothes on my back. Yeah! Yeah! Well, let's end this thing. Tell your neighbor, if you've seen it, you gotta say it. So when you think of the goodness of Jesus and all he's done for you, your soul ought to say something. Cry out, holler, scream.